All right, good afternoon. What's poppin'? It's your boy Big Rich, Queens, New York City, where we get busy. Came home a little early from work, feeling under the weather. Got my lemon ginger tea with some honey. I'm about to get into some business. Mob Stories, Season 2, north of the border. Salute to my Canadians. Let's go. Quebec dairy mogul Lino Saputo had secret past dealings with U.S. mobster Joe Bonanno, then lied about it. Lino Saputo turned his family's humble cheesemaking business into a multi-billion-dollar global dairy empire and became one of the 10 richest people in Canada in the process. But while amassing his $6.5 billion fortune, Saputo has also been dodged by allegations of having ties to powerful mafia figures in both Canada and the United States. The 82-year-old businessman had repeatedly denied those allegations, most recently in a memoir published last year. He devotes an entire chapter to disputing the claims. We respected the law, kept our distance from criminal organizations, and avoid crossing the wrong people, Saputo writes, an entrepreneur living our dreams. But between 1964 and 1979, Saputo maintained a clandestine relationship with one of the most powerful gangsters in the U.S., according to police evidence. The evidence gathered by federal and state law enforcement officials in the 1970s detailed personal and financial dealings between Saputo and Joseph Bonanno, considered one of the founding members of the American Mafia. In 1980, a retired New York judge reviewed the police evidence as part of an administrative hearing. The former judge determined Saputo was so closely linked to Bonanno that allowing him to do business in New York was not in the public's interest. Before Saputo Inc. became the dairy industry giant it is today, employing 17,000 people around the world, the family operated a cheesemaking business from the modest building in Montreal's St. Michael neighborhood. In the early 1960s, the building was also home to the Saputo family, including Lino, then in his mid-20s, and his father Giuseppe. It was here in May 1964 that the Saputos had lunch with Bonanno. At the time, Bonanno was in charge of one of the so-called five families, the crime syndicates that composed the New York Mafia. Bonanno says in his autobiography, A Man of Honor, that he only met with the Saputos at the insistence of a mutual friend. However, in an immigration document that he filed during his stay in Montreal, Bonanno claimed to have known the Saputos since the early 1960s. He called them his friends. The May 1964 meeting resulted in a business proposal. Giuseppe Saputo drew up a letter offering to sell Bonanno a 20% stake in three companies then owned by his family in exchange for $8,000, around $66,000 when adjusted for inflation. In his memoir, Lino Saputo said his family had no idea who Bonanno was when they agreed to the deal. When Bonanno was later arrested by Montreal police for an immigration violation, Saputo saw him described as the king of the Mafia in the newspaper headline. According to Saputo's account, his father rushed to cancel the deal. We thought that was the end of it, as the agreement was never finalized, Saputo wrote. But suspicions that he had ties to Mafia continued to follow Saputo throughout the 1970s. They were unfounded, he said, and hurt his business. I felt victimized and cut off from Quebec society by the false allegations based solely on our Italian origins, he wrote. In 1978, under the guise of one of his companies, Lino Saputo applied for a license to operate a cheese manufacturing business in New York State. State officials were reluctant to grant the application after they learned of the 1964 business deal between Saputo and Bonanno. During the administrative hearings into his application, Saputo said under oath that the meeting in Montreal was the first and only time he had met Bonanno. Saputo's memoir notes simply state that the judge eventually rejected our request, adding that a competitor and a Quebec agriculture official testified on his behalf. The reason, though, was that the judge had concluded in 1980 that Saputo gave false, misleading, and deceitful statements about his ties with Bonanno. Radio Canada accessed all of the evidence that U.S. law enforcement submitted to the administrative hearings into Saputo's application. Along with his testimony from U.S. law enforcement officials, the 1,500 pages of evidence detailed how Saputo disguised interactions and financial dealings with Bonanno between 1964 and 1979. During the hearings, Saputo was asked if he had seen Bonanno after May 1964. "No, sir," Saputo replied. He was then asked, "Were you in Tucson, Arizona on February 1, 1970? Saputo answered, "Not that I remember, sir." But FBI informants had spotted Saputo and his wife, Miriella, visiting Bonanno at his home in Tucson on that day. An FBI agent also told the New York hearings that the Saputos were checked in under the name Sapporo at a Tucson Holiday Inn between January 30th and February 1st, 1970. Though Bonanno had by this time retired as head of the New York crime syndicate that bore his family name, authorities believed he was still an active criminal in Arizona and California. Investigators in the U.S. presented no other evidence that Saputo and Bonanno had met in person after 1970. They did, however, present evidence indicating the pair remained in contact, at least until the end of the 1970s. Beginning in the summer of 1975, Arizona State Police placed Bonanno's Tucson home under surveillance. Twice a week, Bonanno, then in his 70s, would put his trash cans by the curb. An undercover police van would drive by the house discreetly soon after. Officers went inside the van, took the contents from the bins, and filled them again with fake garbage, all in less than 45 seconds. They even plied Bonanno's Doberman with meat to prevent the dog from barking. State and FBI investigators would then sift through Bonanno's garbage. Bonanno was a diligent note-taker, tearing them up and throwing them out when he was done. Between 1975 and 1979, police were able to piece back together around 6,000 notes and other documents from Bonanno's trash can. We learned by both studying him and watching him that he was the most powerful mafioso in the United States and had special influence, we learned, in Canada and throughout Latin America. Eugene Eman, a former state police investigator who played a leading role in the operation against Bonanno. Bonanno was still an actively known figure in New York. He was the Godfather, plain and simple. Among the notes, investigators noticed references to Lino. Several notes, for instance, seemed to suggest that Bonanno had helped organize a trip to California for him. Lino is a person of mine with no charge at the hotel, no charge at the restaurant, reads the FBI translation of a note written in Italian. In a recent interview with Radio Canada, Eman, now retired, said that with the help of the RCMP, his team determined Lino was Lino Saputo. They seemed to interact very smoothly with each other, Eman said of Saputo and Bonanno. In 1979, authorities finally searched Bonanno's house itself. A few days later, the mobster dumped 1,200 notes in the trash, seemingly unaware he was still under surveillance. The latest dump included newspaper articles from Quebec that discussed Bonanno and the Mafia. Police also found lawyers' letters, financial statements, and investment scenarios that linked Bonanno to Saputo and his businesses. Bonanno had obviously panicked and wanted to get rid of these documents, which have, as we now have found, connected him more deeply in his relationships with Saputo Cheese, Eman said. The notes in Bonanno's garbage often referred to liquido, an Italian word for cash. In several notes, Bonanno wrote that he needed to discuss liquido with someone called Pepe Fredo. Bonanno received multiple calls from Pepe Fredo during the 1970s at telephone booths in a Tuscan hospital, which were being monitored by law enforcement officials. Eman said an FBI agent was occasionally lying on a stretcher nearby, trying to understand what was being discussed. Mean kid, these fucking agents, what they won't do. With the help of the RCMP, Eman said agents in the U.S. concluded that Pepe Fredo was a code name for Giuseppe Borsellino. Borsellino had been a business partner of Saputo's since the 1960s and was an early shareholder in his cheese businesses. He is also married to Saputo's sister, Elena. Aside from their telephone conversations in the 1970s, Borsellino also corresponded with Bonanno. In one 1975 letter found by police, Borsellino apologizes profusely for failing to call at an agreed-upon time. In another, Bonanno tells Borsellino, "I would like, if possible, to hear the voice of your brother-in-law and speak with him." At the cheese licensing hearings in New York, Eman said his colleagues presented evidence that Saputo colluded in funneling $51,000 U.S. to Bonanno, worth around $210,000 today. The money was withdrawn from an account belonging to a business owned by Borsellino's brother and was meant to pay an outstanding bill to one of Saputo's cheese companies. But a disguised money wrapper found in Bonanno's trash, along with several recovered notes, was evidence the cash wound up instead at Bonanno's home. Law enforcement authorities presented their evidence about Saputo's ties to Bonanno over the course of a 10-day administrative hearing held in 1980. A retired appeals court judge, Charles D. Brightel, was appointed to preside over the hearing. He recommended the state refuse Saputo's application for a cheese manufacturing license. In his recommendation, Brightel singled out the $51,000 in cash. He considered it a fact the money went to Bonanno with knowledge and collusion of Saputo. Joseph Bonanno had a significant economic and transactional involvement over a substantial period of years with several Canadian cheese companies owned by the members of the Saputo family and by Lino Saputo in particular, Brightel wrote in his 1980 report. The evidence, he said, pointed to a relationship that lasted between 1964 and 1979. Brightel added, Lino Saputo has attempted to conceal from the department his and his company's involvement with Bonanno. He has failed to furnish all the material information required by the commissioner and has made material statements that are false, misleading, and deceitful. Brightel's determination was confirmed upon appeal. The investigation by U.S. law enforcement into Saputo's ties with Bonanno ended with a decision to withhold the cheese-making license. Bonanno died in 2002 at the age of 97. His obituaries claimed he was the model for actor Marlon Brando's character, The Godfather. Saputo Inc. went public in 1997. The company, which has operations in Australia, Argentina, the United States, and the United Kingdom, is worth an estimated $15 billion. Now, that's a lot of cheese. Saputo, a member of the Order of Canada, has never been charged with a criminal offense. He declined an interview request from Radio Canada's investigative unit. In a letter, Saputo's lawyer said his client has never had ties to organized crime, be it in a direct or indirect manner. Saputo's memoir refers to the nightmare of false allegations about being tied to the Mafia. There's no mention in Saputo's book to Borsellino's link to Bonanno. The one reference to Borsellino reads, "We have found Petra, our real estate arm, now one of the largest private real estate companies in Quebec with over 8.3 million square feet of property in Montreal. My dear friend and brother-in-law, Giuseppe Borsellino, is president." Borsellino had been in contact with other Mafia figures besides Bonanno. In 1995, Borsellino and his wife, Lino Saputo, attended a wedding anniversary party for Niccolo Rizzuto and Libertina Mano. They can be identified in a video of the event that was given to Radio Canada by a confidential source. Rizzuto's son Vito was also present. He was widely considered at the time to be the head of the Montreal Mafia. Court documents have identified both Rizzutos as members of the Bonanno crime family. A confidential police document obtained by Radio Canada alleges Borsellino had contact with the Rizzutos at least until the mid-2000s. Like Saputo, Borsellino has never been charged with a crime. He too declined to answer questions from Radio Canada. His lawyer said in a letter that Borsellino, who remains chair of Group Petra's board, has done nothing wrong. Radio Canada asked Saputo to comment on his brother-in-law's contact with the Rizzutos. He did not respond. All right, so great article. Salute to Shattered for getting it for me. Let's see. It's from CBC News, and it was written by Jonathan Monpetit. All right? So, good article. Salute. Mob Story Season 2. You already know how we do. Gentlemen, on the way out, blow some smoke in the atmosphere. All right? Peace.